Sonia, who organized successfully this difficult machine for me, but we can manage. This is my first webinar, so I get butterflies on my stomach. I'm a little nervous, but I can manage. We all tackle the COVID emergency, so this is easier to manage. The webinar is about a strange couple of concepts, at least in qualitative research, rigor and creativity. The lack of creativity is a refrain very common in all the criticism against qualitative research, and this is not a novelty, as we will see in the following parts of the webinar. In this webinar, as Sonia said, I will tackle some core concepts that I developed in my recent book published by Routledge, Defending Qualitative Research, and I try in the webinar and also in the book a marriage between creativity and rigor based on the mediation of the theory of argumentation. So I try to offer a rigor to qualitative research without renouncing to the creativity that is the main feature, the cipher of the qualitative research. So ready, go. I hope, okay. Qualitative research is one of the most widespread method, particularly recently and in the young generation, but this kind of doing research carry on receiving pungent criticism about the soundness of the result and about what in the quantitative jargon is defined as the issue of generalizability. And I prefer to use the expression, the extension of the scope of our research results. This is not a novelty, as I said, and if we consider what can be thought as one of the methodological monument of qualitative research, the book of Lincoln and Guba, Naturalistic Inquiry, published in 1985, we can read that, I'm reading with you, the naturalist inquirer soon becomes accustomed to hearing charge that naturalistic study are undisciplined, that he or she is guilty of sloppy research engaging in merely subjective observation, so and so. So they conclude, rigor is asserted, is not the hallmark, is not the main feature of a naturalism of qualitative research. So the criticism against the qualitative research about rigor is based on an idea of rigor typical of quantitative research, and this means based on the idea of standardization of the procedure of data collection through operational definition, and also based on the observation of a huge number of cases. And in order to fulfill these requirements, the guide, the main way is the use of the theory of probability, or in the Goldthorpe words, the logic of inference. The problem is that this kind of path toward rigor cannot be followed by qualitative research due its intrinsic features. That means the flexibility of data collection. That means being context sensitive, avoiding the standardization, and also the concentration of our gaze on a handful of information-rich case. So it's impossible to follow this idea of Rigor in a way in which we mimic the quantitative research. Okay, so the attitude toward Rigor in qualitative research archipelago can be summarized in two main positions. One of them is the refusal, the idea that Rigor is not possible, but not acceptable as a goal, because this is thought as a method-o-centrism, a kind of Foucauldian surveillance of our activity, who engage creativity of research. The other position is based on the invention or the proposal of some alternative version of Rigor different from that proposed by quantitative research. And the mainstream in this area, I mean, the mainstream in trying to define alternative criteria to defend the Rigor, is based on the grounded theory approach, who propose for the sampling issue the notion of theoretical saturation. I'm not totally convinced of the soundness of this way of solving the problem, but this is an alternative solution. Then grounded theory propose some codified procedure for data analysis and elaborate on the idea of credibility as an alternative of the quantitative equivalent of validity and reliability. We have also some other proposals from many different portions of the archipelago of qualitative research, also with different epistemological persuasion. We have the proposal of Kirk and Miller, a reframing of the quantitative idea of reliability and validity, and also from Maxwell, that is an ex-scholar of the realist approach, a different idea of validity proposed in this for this purpose. So, before going inside to my proposal to use theory of argumentation, I would like to, I want to present my proposal as a proposal who go in the same, which go in the same direction, but with a different gate, with a different orientation or approach. Before going inside this, a short, maybe pedantic, epistemological premise can be useful for our purpose. So, starting from the second half of the past century, we learn that we have to cohabit with uncertainty. Hansen persuades us that we have to consider observation as a theory-laden procedure, and we have to renounce to the dogma of immaculate perception, and also to the comfortable idea of truth as correspondence. So we have cohabit with uncertainty, and I think that we have two different houses for uncertainty. One is the house of theory of probability that is very comfortable for quantitative research. And in the other side, we have the theory or argumentation that can offer a roof, a house for uncertainty, but that is comfortable for qualitative research. So the idea is that theory of argumentation have the same function of theory of probability, although there are some very important differences between these kind of approaches. Let me say something about theory of argumentation. That is a multidisciplinary area of research that include philosophy, social and cognitive science, law, but also artificial intelligence research and many other fields. And the object and the purpose of theory of argumentation is to study the nature, functions, and limits of persuasive discourses. Argumentation and theory of argumentation relate to something that is not so very strange, it's not so philosophical in a way. There are many examples in everyday discourses of this way of reasoning, and I'm giving you some example. This is taken by my book, and I'm going to read with you. During my last stay in Brazil, by the way, there are some Brazilian colleagues here participating to the webinar, and I want to say bon dia. So I restart. During my last stay in Brazil as a visiting scholar, Luciani, Alini, Jacqueline, and many other colleagues were very hospitable with me. This is probably a trait of Brazilian academic culture, and this is the typical argument from example. Another piece, another statement: Paul cannot tolerate an open-ended question in a questionnaire. How can he accept a research project based on in-depth interview? Double hierarchy argument. And then the last example. Yesterday I went to Luigi's office door, but strangely enough, he wasn't it. I assumed that he was in the library. And this is the abductive argument. So we can recognize that during our everyday activity, we and also the participant of our research, argumentation, we use scheme to produce reasoning. And staying on the last example, the abductive argument, is very relevant to underline that abductive and analogical reasoning are very important for qualitative research. They are the engine of qualitative research, as you can read in the very well written book by Timmerman and Tavory, Abductive Analysis, in which the strength of analogical and abductive reasoning is very well expressed and defended. What is important in abductive and analogical reasoning, this is maybe an aspect that is important to underline, is the role of theory. Theory is a very important ingredient in the reasoning, in abductive and analogical reasoning, but also in many other kind of argumentation. Okay. Carry on a qualitative research, in my view, can be thought as a construction of an argument in which we defend the method we decide to use, we defend the soundness of our research result, and also we defend the rightfulness to the extension from studied case to unstudied case, what is commonly defined in quantitative jargon as generalization. And in the picture, you see the defense of a thesis in a Dutch university, and this can be thought as a model of our producing, something who introduce a topic and some other people who contest, who counter argument against this topic, developing a dialectical approach to the production of knowledge. Okay, the idea of qualitative research as a production, as a construction of an argument is very well rooted in our tradition of qualitative research. Going again back with the Lincoln and Guba book, Naturalistic Inquiry, we can read the authors asking themselves, how can an inquirer persuade his or her audience, including self, that the findings of an inquiry as worth paying attention to, worth taking account of, which argument can be mounted, what criteria can be invoked to defend the soundness. All the words in red are the typical vocabulary of the theory of argumentation: to persuade, audience, argument. And also in the book of Auerbach, Trick of the Trades, he introduced the idea of synecdoche as the way in which we can represent the sampling strategy. So the idea of using theory of argumentation as a tool to defend the soundness of our result is not a new one. It is not my invention. What I've done can be thought as the application of a search heuristic, the borrowing heuristic in the meaning of Henry Habot, and with the borrowing in this case is the borrowing of a method from a field, maybe a little far from our common field, and to import these tools in our field. Nothing new, but if it works, we can define it as a little or big success. So what I borrowed some tools from the Canadian School of Theory of Argumentation based on the reflection of Douglas Walton in the picture, and I picked up mainly two tools: the proleptic argumentation and the argumentation schemes. I borrowed this instrument, adopted and adapted them in the qualitative research in a way that I'm going to explain. So what is a proleptic argumentation? Is a kind of argumentation in which the sequence of a dialectical move that usually is present in a discussion with at least two people are advanced by one interlocutor only, who makes a claim and consider the possibility objection to this claim, and then use a kind of rebuttal to the objection, and with the proposal to make his argument more and more sound. I've just finished, before the COVID emergence, a team ethnography on mechanical restraint in psychiatric wards, carried out with Luigi Gariglio, Raffaella Ferrero Camoletto, Eleonora Lossero, and Valeria Quaglia, who worked with me. We worked together as a team. And in order to define the research design, we use a sort of proleptic argumentation. We first started asking, why don't interviewing patients who have been bounded to bed, and okay, this can be a good idea, but how about the resentful of individual, and how can we have an idea of the reason of the attitude of professional, only asking, only interviewing patients. Sonia, what I have to do, I have to answer the question, or I carry on to the end?
Please carry on, and then we will answer everything at the end. Thank you.
And then we think about the possibility to interviewing health professional, but this can be not totally convincing way, because we can add the problem of the desirability of some opinion, because professional can cover this kind of practice that is not ethically blameless. Then we decide to go where the action is, to perform an ethnography, a team ethnography, and we have to decide which word. So we discuss, are we looking for having a word for any kind of attitude toward coercion in psychiatry? And we, in the end, decide to compare very different words with very different attitude and practice in the coercion, using the most different design. So,
thank you.
So this is the idea, is a process in which we, as a group, questioning ourselves in order to define the best research design, considering pros and cons from each solution, and in the end we define our design. So the proleptic argumentation can be used to organize every kind of reasoning to guide qualitative research, starting from the research design and arriving to the analysis step and the textualization step. Every answer to the respondent during this dialectical dialogue can be considered as a propositional commitment. So when I've said it's not convenient to study only the patient, I've done an assumption about the way in which patient can experience this kind of coercion, and my conclusion are underpinned on the soundness of my propositional commitment. So the reasoning is dotted. We have many propositional commitments that marks the plausibility boundary of the soundness of our conclusion. So due this fact, every propositional commitment becomes a factor of the conditional plausibility, which molds the plausibility of the conclusion we reach. In a formula, the conclusion will be sound if the propositional commitment assumed are plausible. So our conclusion are plausible if the assumption, some theoretical, some empirical, we have included in our reasoning can be considered sound plausible. Okay, now we move to the other instrument, the argumentation scheme. And this scheme offers a organized version of this kind of reasoning based on the some premises, some conclusion, and also some critical question, part of the argumentation scheme, which help the researcher, the scholar, to better define his or her scheme. The conclusion of this kind of reasoning can be considered only plausible. They are always, they can be defeated if new evidence arrive. In the ancient textbook on logic, this kind of reasoning were considered fallacies. Now, in the new informal logic approach, they are considered the feasible reasoning. We can reach only plausibility, not certainty. We stay totally in the uncertainty land. Each critical question that can be considered part of every argumentation scheme serves a different purpose that are they can be used to question whether a premise or scheme holds, if there are some exceptional situation in which a scheme should be not used, if there are some conditions that are important to apply the scheme, or if there can be some other counter argument that we have to consider when we organize our reasoning. In the example I introduced a moment ago about the theme ethnography on coercion in psychiatry, we use the most different system design that I rename as the argument from irrelevant difference. And the idea is to compare the words in the extreme position of the continuum, words in which there are a lot of coercion, and words in which there are less or no coercion. We assume that studying the extreme of the continuum can offer us the possibility to conclude something about the words in the middle, in which there are an intermediate level of the coercion. The idea, to be more clear on this point, we assume that the pathological profile of inpatient is not relevant, is not decisive in order to trigger the use of coercion, to trigger the mechanical restraint. What really matters is the cultural and organizational profile of the word, and we are assuming that studying the extreme words in the continuum can give us the possibility to say something of more general. Propositional commitment, a propositional commitment that mold our conditional plausibility. There are many versions of this kind of reasoning that can be used in qualitative research in the design of the research design step or phases. We have the argument from the example, very important to tackle one of the most relevant issue in qualitative research, to get information-rich case that give us enough eloquence to defend our conclusion. So the argument from example can become double hierarchy argument, argument from irrelevant difference, from relevant difference, argument from radical otherness, and then we have some kind of other argument used in the data analysis and textualization, the argument from sign, the abductive reasoning, the argument from analogy, and the argument from positional. To know is the typical argument that we use when we create our representation of a culture based on key informants. Similar with the proleptic argumentation, we have propositional commitment in each schemes that define the conditional plausibility of our conclusion. So we can better define the idea of conditional plausibility that can be thought as the analogical equivalent in the argument, in the argumentative reasoning of the conditional probability in the theory of probability in the statistical inference. In statistics, we define the conditional probability as the condition of the probability of A if B is present. And in the theory of argumentation, the situation is not so easy. We don't have a formula, but the idea is that our conclusion can be considered sound if all the propositional commitment we have done during our research can be considered strong, sound enough for our research. So the conclusion of our research are conditioned by the plausibility of all the propositional commitment adopted during our research path or process. So to conclude, conditional plausibility for managing uncertainty in qualitative research, instead of looking for some kind of formula that can guarantee certainty. I'm thinking about the formula in a way of theoretical saturation for which we are confident of the possibility to extend the scope of our research. I prefer to stay in the uncertainty, managing the uncertainty, and have a clear idea of the uncertainty that imbue our result. Then, through this kind of approach, we are enhancing the contribution of theory, because many of our propositional commitments are theory-laden, if I may, are based on theory. And my view is that theory is a very strong tool in our research, and we can take profit from the research of other colleagues of us, other scholars that can offer us concept theory. And the scheme proposed by theory of argumentation is a way in which we can make clear the relationship between data, theories, and reasoning. Howard Baker defined the good qualitative research, a research in which we have a good dialogue between data and theory. I agree totally with Baker, if I may, but the idea is that through theory of argumentation, we can frame the quality of the dialogue, the quality of the dialectical dialogue in a good way. So this is the list of the cited works in the presentation, and I'm concluding. Thank you all of you for participating to this webinar. You can download the slide at my website, and you can also download the introduction of the book which inspire this webinar, Defending Qualitative Research. And I am very happy because at the beginning the publisher didn't want to share the introduction, but in the end they changed their mind, and so you can download the introduction just to have a better idea of the study. Okay, thank you. I'm giving you the floor.
Thank you.
Sonia.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. So if our participants want to connect their microphones and their webcams now, please do so. We have a couple of questions in the chat window, but I would like to ask Tuka Mary. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name, but Tuka had raised her hand during the presentation. I don't know if she wants to ask you a question. Tuka, if you have your microphone, or if you want to write your question in the chat window.
Maybe, Sonia? Maybe I start with a question.
Hi, Antonio.
Hi, Mario. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Again, I love your presentation. I have a question because I'm a researcher from webQDA software. Do you think a software like webQDA promote the rigor of qualitative research? What do you think about when I use a strong word? Rigor is a quantitative word. I love this word in qualitative research because I like my studies, rigor studies. But for me, it's important to use a software like webQDA. What do you think about a tool like webQDA to help to understand my data?
Okay. Thank you for your interesting question. I think that using software in order to analyze qualitative data is particularly useful when we are in a team, we are in a group. My idea is that my idea of producing conclusion of research is not to look only for consent among members of the group, but also to define clear reason to dissent, to have a dialectical confrontation. I think that the use of software, in my experience, is not so necessary if you are on your own, but if you are in a group, is a very good way in which the group can share categories, way to analyze data and to discuss about category. What worries me a little is that in same situation, qualitative data analysis software are used as a cookbook, in which you have to follow a receipt and follow some standardized procedure. If you are, but this is not the proper and necessary use of qualitative data analysis software. You can use this software to share and to realize the idea of categorization as a fuzzy instrument. when we use software in this perspective, I think that we can offer to qualitative research some important tools.
Okay, thank you.
Mario, can you see in the chat window, because we have a couple of questions there?
The chat, where is? Can you help me?
In the upper menu.
Chat. Okay. 40.
If you scroll up a little bit, there are two questions. One from Rafaela.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not able to. Can you read the question for me?
Sure. So Rafaela's question is, in your perspective, who are the target of our arguments? The scientific community, which is the main validating reference for our research results? The community of our informants in a more participatory-based approach, or both? Is there any space in your perspective for a participatory process of co-production of knowledge in social sciences?
Yeah. Thank you also for this intriguing question. One of the idea, starting from the first use of theory of argumentation in the scientific area, I was thinking about Stephen Toulmin, the use of argument, 1958, a very good period. And the idea is that we have some notion field independent and some other notion argument field dependent. This idea is present also in Perelman or Brectiteca, who speak about different audience. So when we try to define the soundness of our argument, the soundness is dependent on the audience we choose. And obviously in qualitative research, we have at least a couple of different audience. The first one is the audience of colleagues, the scientific community. And if we look closer the idea of scientific community, inside the scientific community, we have some different sub-communities. In my area, that of sociology of health, I have to confront my result both with sociologists, but also with epidemiologists, psychiatrists. And the way in which I have to defend my result can be different if my audience are sociologists or hard science researcher. This is quite important in order, if I want to publish in a multidisciplinary journal or in a strictly sociological journal. The other aspect is that of participant. In the book, I spend some page on the idea of collaborative ethnography, and this is a very interesting idea based in the notion of co-authorship between researcher and participant involved together in writing, in the textualization procedure. We have to consider that we have two different ways of doing so. I am a little obsessed by the dialectical dimension. The bad way, in my view, or the not so good way in doing this kind of cooperative writing is to look for a full consent between us and the participant. In doing so, we risk to renounce to the task of a critical reading of the social interaction in which we are, that we observe. The other possible solution is to admit with the participant the possibility of dissent, in which we can have our voice and participant can have their voice. We can have a different view of the phenomena studied, and this is a difficult task. But if we decide that the cooperative writing is based on the consent, in some aspect, the aspect of the culture that we are studying can make participants to lose their face, to be in a bad shadow. They do not allow us to write about this aspect. And this is a way to renounce to our critical. Sometimes the situation is solved taking a very strong advocacy position. So the researcher decides to stay with the underdogs. And in doing so, in some occasion, the scientific discourses change in political discourses. And I'm not against political discourses, but I think that they are different from scientific discourses. This is a very interesting topic. I'm sure that I wasn't able to go inside in all the aspects, but people, Raffaella is an Italian colleague.
I suppose so, yes.
Raffaella Ferrero, Camoletto? No? Yeah, okay.
Okay, we have a few more questions here
okay.
in the chat. Let's see if we can tackle all the...
I have some difficulty on the chat, yeah.
No problem.
Okay, okay. I am in the chat.
You have to scroll up
okay,
a little bit.
I go at the beginning.
There is a question by Iliana Yanis. I suppose it's, that's how you say the name. I'm sorry, Iliana. And the question is, may I know your opinion regarding the use of theory of argumentation for inductive or deductive reasoning in qualitative research?
I'm not sure to be grasp completely the question. It's about the. Can you repeat, please? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. May I know your opinion regarding the use of theory of argumentation for inductive or deductive reasoning in qualitative research?
Yeah. Yes. In my view, the best, the more common and useful inference strategy is the abduction. But we also have the possibility to use deduction and induction in qualitative research. I think that we don't have to avoid deduction. That means trying to take information from theories in order to orient our research in the field. Deduction is very, induction is very important. When we are in the field, we collect some information and we try to put order in this information, and sometimes we look for some general rules, but in doing so, sometimes we also use theory. We invent some hypothesis to create meaning in our data, and this is abduction. So in theory of argumentation, we use mainly abduction and induction that are the more empirical way of producing reasoning. but we can also use deduction in a way that is not the way of formal logic. In the formal logic, deduction is a tautology. We don't have no more information when we use deduction or deductive reasoning. We can use deduction in order to try to test a theory. So we produce an empirical implication from a theory, and this is the empirical, the deductive step of our process of reasoning. Then we test empirically our idea, our hypothesis. For instance, one of the most interesting ethnographic research in a while is that of Festinger about cognitive dissonance, that is based on a deduction about his theory of cognitive dissonance reduction, which oriented his choice of the field in which carry out his study, but in the end were empirical data that allow him to conclude something of very interesting and in a way also actual.
Okay, let's see if we can answer a few more questions here.
Can you tell me the time of the question? This can help me.
Yes, at 4:46, you have a question by Madhavi Dharankar. Can you see it? Otherwise, I can read it for you. 4:46. No. Yeah, the time in your counter is different from mine.
Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. I can read it for you.
So for me, it's 5:46.
46. Yes.
Okay, I'm going.
Madhavi Dharankar.
How does one develop the ability of argumentation in the novice qualitative researchers? Yes, this is another very interesting question, is the how can we teach qualitative research in general, and how can we teach this approach? I think that the best way to nurture the critical attitude, the dialectical attitude based on the use of theory of argumentation is through the discussion, through the analysis of well-done research piece, well-done research, but also to ask people to invent research project and to discuss. The idea is that the dialogue, Plato's dialogue, can be considered as an example in which different position confronts each other, and through this kind of confrontation, is it possible to develop? I think that also reading some piece of some books on theory of argumentation, and also only a little chapter, I wrote a chapter maybe 20 pages, can be useful, because I don't know how things are all around the world, but for instance, in Italy, we don't have any kind of teaching activity based on the development of debating, of dialogue activity. In the United States, they have debate team. They learn to defend their position. They learn the kind of argument that can be suitable to attack or to defend, to attack opponent or to defend their argument. This can be useful. In doing so, some rules, some general rules, some example can be useful. Okay.
Okay,
Sonia,
so
can you guide me to the other question?
Yes, maybe just another one. 551 from Pablo Lucas.
Okay. 551, Pablo. Muito obrigado, de nada, Mario, for your interesting presentation. I am curious if you have a view on doing sentiment analysis using algorithm and lexicon compared with manual topic modeling. I'm sorry, but I don't have enough information to answer your question. Please give me some more details if you want to have my opinion. Okay, I try to, I invent, maybe I invent. So if the gist of the question is the comparison between algorithms and manual procedure. That is, can be considered a general rule. My idea is that algorithms are blind. So in order to apply algorithm, you have to decide which kind of algorithms, and also to analyze result. You have to invest in a continuous confrontation with your algorithm. If you look for a general formula to get answer, this is not a good way. But if you try to analyze some data, I have an opinion maybe not so popular in this area. My view is that qualitative research has to be carried out on a little number of cases, not so many cases. Is not the approach that we can use for big data. Big data are important, but in order to analyze big data, quantitative research or quantitative semantics can be better. Qualitative research is oriented to go in depth, to analyze nuances in discourses. So algorithms can give you a first reading of your data, can help you to organize some information. Then my suggestion is to use your capacity to go inside, not only you on your own, but with your team, with some colleague, with the tutor for students, and to go inside. We need algorithms usually if we have a very large data set. But in my view, a very large data set can only consider as a start. Then we select some kind of ideal type of discourses or piece of data, and in this portion of data we go with more with a close reading of the text. I don't know if I answer properly to your question, but
okay. Anyway,
I'm very happy to having all your attention. So if you want to carry on this discussion, you can write me, and or we can plan a chat and we can carry on this discussion after.
That's what I was going to suggest, because we are stretching this session now. It's almost over an hour. So if you are okay, I would suggest we end this session for now.
Okay.
And if you are available, maybe we can do another webinar in the near future.
Okay, okay.
So let me just